702.
You're listening to the best of The Money Show.
The Money Show.
Welcome to the best bits of The Money Show, a digest of some of the best thoughts, interviews, comments, and interviews we had from the show this week. If you'd like to hear more, and I kind of hope that you would like to hear more, please go to our website or your podcast app and search for The Money Show. And as always, there's bound to be someone in your life who would benefit from hearing it out of just interest, or maybe they're about to make a big financial decision, or maybe something that's happened in one of the lives of the people you're about to hear from will have an impact on how they feel about something that happened in their life. Tonight, we bring you a mixture of stories from the world of money from the week that has been. Your shapeshifter this week, we looked at the career journey of Prof Jan Havenga. He co-founded the study of macro logistics in South Africa. He's someone who's studied logistics here. He studied trains and how they work in Vietnam and in China. He's currently the Stellenbosch University professor of macro logistics. And as you can hear, was right at the birth of Transnet. He even arranged their launch party. Here's Professor Jan Havenga.
I grew up in a relatively, I would call it in today's terms, maybe poor railway household. So my dad worked for the railways. He was a conductor in the railways. That means that we could travel for free by train, number one. And number two, because our family didn't have a car, just a train for me was a mean of escape. And I started to love trains from a very, very early age in my life. I really enjoyed trains. Everything about it. And at this stage of my life, I've really traveled by train all over the world. I've done the Canadian between Toronto and Vancouver twice in my life. Many things like that. And I just love trains. It started with that. The fact that trains can keep an economy moving. And up to 1989, we were forced to use the railway for freight transport. So, and that was very interesting to me. Very, very interesting. So after I've left university, I joined the railways, and it just came from there.
I mean, even now, when you study logistics and you talk to us about ports, is trains still your, what you call your first love? Is it still the thing you're most interested in? I mean, in some countries, people might call you, and this can sometimes be a slightly difficult term, but it can be with affection too. They'll call you a train spotter.
Yes, I am a rail evangelist through and through, but from a very scientific basis these days.
Sure.
From the work that we've done, even work that we've published with the UIC, which is United Union of Railroads, and the International Energy Agency, we have a very clear view these days from our freight demand model and freight flow model of what should be on rail. So although I love railways, I also understand exactly what it is that the railway can do. It is not a willy-nilly thing. And in fact, if you go back now and you look at the economy of South Africa in 1989, the fact that railways was used too much and for freight that shouldn't have been on rail, we can now clearly prove what the damage is that it caused. But I do love railways. I'm sitting here in my study at the moment, and right next to me is my 6x5 meters, 3-layer, 60 train, model train layout,
Wow.
which I love to run. And I had some very illustrious visitors to this layout over the last few months, including the Minister of Transport for the Western Cape has been here twice.
Sure.
So I love trains.
That's amazing.
Absolutely.
That's amazing. You talked about growing up in a relatively poor small town. Your father was a conductor. And you went to university. Were you the first in your family to go?
Yes, in our household, my older brother, who's passed away sadly in a road accident, he went to university, but he didn't complete it. But in my case, many of my family members and many people in not a small town. I grew up in Montclair in Durban, but it was a railway village within Durban, and not many people from there actually went to university. That is true.
You worked at Spoornet, I think it was from 1979, which is the old name for the old railway company, and it had a variety of names. What was it like then? I mean, as a child, I went on those trains maybe once or twice in the 1980s, and there was as an outsider, it looked quite fun. These are people who move around the country. I know that moving around the country for work actually isn't fun. But what was it like? What was the company like when you joined it?
No, trains were fantastic fun. I mean, your question's got two answers. Just in terms of the trains themselves and how much fun they were. I went and worked at the railways. I couldn't immediately find a job that I liked, so I actually started in Bethlehem Station delivering parcels coming from Durban, just so that I can get a job before going to the army. When I got out of the army, I went on a 30,000 kilometer trip right through the country. I could do a first-class trip and just see everything. And the trains were absolutely marvelous. I remember the train between Port Elizabeth and Cape Town had one of those 1913 dining coaches on them with the loose chairs and a beautiful lighting and so on. It was fantastic times. But on the interesting side, if you're talking about the railways as an organization, you have to go much further back than Spoornet. You're going back 1979, it was called the South African Railways and Harbours. That wasn't even a business. It was purely a government department. We changed the name in 1981 to South African Transport Services, and it was still not a government department. And when I reflected by myself, why on earth would you ask me to join this interview? I thought to myself, what is the one thing that I could be thankful for? And that is, I've always been in my life where important logistics things happen in this country. For some reason, I've always been around. And I've always had evidence. And that makes you part of the conversation one way or the other. Why I mention this now, in the 1980s, my office was right next to de Villiers' office that he temporarily occupied in a Paul Kruger building, which was the head office of SA Transport Services, as the place was known since 1981. When he wrote the famous de Villiers report that many people in government today are very upset about, I was part of the team, very, very junior, but I was there when Transnet was formed. So the legal succession of Transnet happened in the 80s. And I had some interesting jobs. One of them was to actually arrange the launch party, which was one of the biggest and interesting parties I've ever arranged in my life. One of the other job I had in that time was to test the name. So we ended up in two names. Southern Transport System was the one, and Transnet was the other one. We ran some focus groups and did some work. So I was there, and I heard many of the things, the discussion points about the creation of Transnet during the 80s and the writing of the Legal Succession Act. And that was really interesting.
It's quite something to be involved in the birth of an organization. And sometimes it can make people feel very connected to it in a way that other people are not. Do you still feel like that with Transnet?
I do. Right here where I sit on my study horse, right next to me is a briefcase that Dr. Anton Moorman gave me in Afrikaans, of all things, with a little inscription on it that said, "For the voortreffelike diens delivered during the creation of this company." And I still have that briefcase, and I feel very close to Transnet. Started to do business on the 1st of April 1990. The company was created on the 19th of February 1990, and some people don't understand the significance of that. Because Transnet wasn't ready to be created. As the Minister of Privatization, as he was named those days, not the Minister of Public Enterprises, told Dr. Moorman, but you're not completely ready. The point is, we said, a lot of things has just happened in South Africa. We now need to move and create this company, and from that point on, restructure it so that we can get what we want. It was an interesting time, interesting to the effect for me as well. If you're talking about living close to Transnet, I can also say I've known each and every group chief executive of Transnet since Dr. Anton Moorman, and I still have contact with Dr. Moorman. We're still alive. He lives in Philadelphia, not far from me. He's part of a little group. There's typical little WhatsApp groups, so they meet every 6 months, and it's the management of Transnet that created the company. They are still there. And since then, I've met each and every one of them. I've spent some time with each and every one of them. Some interesting people. They might not even remember me, like Maria Ramos was one. I knew well. She played a very important role in our work. Brian Marefi as well, etc. Portia, the whole lot. I've known all of them. This company has always been very close to me. Very, very close to me. And I've followed its progression very to the finest detail.
So interesting to hear you talk about that and how it was created and that you did the launch party. The CSIR, so I do want to talk about your academic career a little bit. So the CSIR said in their website that you helped to co-establish the field of macro logistics. Now, I'm presuming by macro logistics you mean tracking how goods move through all logistical systems, all transport systems through all of South Africa?
That is yes. What we are talking about here, we talk about the GDP in motion. And the study of macro logistics does to macroeconomics the same as the logistics do to a company. It's looking for the cheapest cost of ownership of an economy. What is the most effective and cheapest way? And then you have to do trade-offs, just like in logistics. If you send larger consignments, your transport cost is less, but your storage cost becomes higher and your cost of carrying inventory. For a country, we do the same. And we look at three most important things. This is how do we get infrastructure? How do we regulate the access to that infrastructure in a fair way? And spatial planning. And if we can get those three drivers right, and yes, we started to work on this discipline for a very interesting reason. And this was in the 90s. And the interesting thing about this is I will never forget this when I got this challenge in the 90s. So Dr. Friedel Molke and Dr. Leo Petquin, I still have contact with them, told me, we have just deregulated transport in South Africa. We don't know anymore how things move. Can you establish some way of just telling us? And that's one of the unintended consequences of private market. And it's worse than that. If you think about the 80s, we still had marketing boards. You were forced to sell your wheat through the wheat board and your maize through the maize board. We knew how the economy was structured. And then suddenly we had this case where we didn't know anymore. So we first wanted to know, what does GDP in motion look like? And then we tried to establish what is the best way for the economy to move. Now, that's just very interesting work we did in South Africa. And we started to publish it globally. And it was noticed by a very important and interesting person from the World Bank. He asked me to join him in India. I did 17 trips to India, probably about 6 to China and a few to Mongolia, Uzbekistan. And we repeated this type of work right through the world. And eventually I had the opportunity to present it right through the world and to publish it. The one article, Logistics and the Future, the Rise of Macro Logistics, is now the most cited article in macro logistics field. And it's interesting, and it was a lovely opportunity to actually do this. And we enjoyed that. And there's a group of us, there's a group of very clever researchers all around me. And we enjoy this work. It's really wonderful work, yes. It was nice doing it.
I'm your shapeshifter tonight, Professor Jan Havenga, the logistics professor at Stellenbosch University and director of the GAIN Group. And he's been telling you about his love for all things that move, but particularly trains. Jan, I'm trying to imagine what it must have been like for you, a boy from Montclair, a sort of railway community, growing up in the way that you did, the love for trains that you have, and going to a place like China, where railway transport's taken incredibly seriously. There's been huge investment in it. They got trains whizzing all over the place. I mean, what that must have been like for you, it must have been really quite something.
China and India. Initially, I did quite a few trips to China, but even more to India. And in India, trains, it is the most wonderful thing. First base, we have the Indian gauge. So the railway track is even wider than European gauge. They can really work with trains. The second place, it's the most mobile community in the world. The average Indian does 1,300 kilometers of train travel per year, every year. Sure. And they are extremely mobile. I mean, I remember getting on the Delhi metro and paying 10 rupees for a ticket that can take me anywhere in the city, which is 2 rands. I remember taking trips on buses and trams in Kolkata at 5 rupees, which is 1 rand. It's the most mobile nation that I've ever seen. And without a doubt, the reason why India has been so successful, number one, is because they've invested a lot of transport infrastructure over the last 10 years. And number two, they realized that the workforce needs to be mobile and cheaply so. And they do it in a wonderful way. So that's the one side of it. The other side of it, if you've done a presentation to remember traffic of the Indian Railway Board, that is something to experience. The Indian Railway is the biggest employer in the world,
yes.
and it equals to India. And to be in that position where you can present to director generals of rail, of transport, and to people like that, to the board of the Indian Railway, that was quite amazing, a wonderful wonderful, wonderful privilege to be able to do that and enjoy that. And talk about, if you go to India with a World Bank team, talk about railways and talk about cricket. And because the team members of the World Bank come from the Netherlands and America and so on, you're the only person that can have the cricket discussion as well. And that is always fun.
Do you think it would ever be possible for us to do what China has done? I mean, the president spoke a few years ago about fast trains between cities, and I mean, I'm desperate to do a sort of train trip from Joburg to Cape Town and back again. I don't know if I will be able to for some time. The Shosholoza mail is still sort of being sorted out. But I mean, when the president first said fast trains, I think everybody sort of laughed at him, and I can understand the cynicism. Do you think it's possible for a country like us?
It's a very difficult question for me because there's exactly what you're saying. There's one portion of me that gets very excited because I love trains. Then I also know the research and I know the science behind it. And there's no business case for any fast trains to the level of the ICE or the TGV or Thales or any one of these trains, for the Chinese high-speed trains. There's no business case in South Africa for that. The only real business case is where you have to connect two cities that's reasonably far apart in less than 3 hours. Then people will not fly and they'll catch a train. Maybe 3.5 hours, you will still make it. And the French proved it to us. The only possibility in South Africa for lots of trips, which is about 2.5 million per annum, between Durban and Johannesburg, is the only possibility that we have for a really high-speed train.
Professor Jan Havenga, not just a party planner, but also an expert on logistics and a professor at Stellenbosch University and director of the Gain Group. Fascinating to hear some of his stories from the very beginning of Transnet.
The best of the Money Show
on 702.
702.
Your consumer ninja, Wendy Knowler, unpacking a really interesting case about bank fee. So one farmer's challenge to ABSA was a big increase in loan charges. It was sold as an improvement. He thought this didn't quite work out for him. He worked out what the cost would be and he complained. Wendy Knowler takes up the story.
Okay, so think of it like the access facility on your home loan if you have one. So you pay a bit extra into your bond when you can and it reduces the interest that you'll pay overall. And then when you need that money later, if you need it, you draw it out again. So Hendrik de Kok, who farms at Johanneskraal near Napier, has been doing exactly that with his ABSA business loans for 2 decades now. So when the farm has cash, it goes into the loan, and when he needs it back for operating costs, he takes it out again. And at ABSA, that is called Flexi Reserve. And all was well until recently.
Okay, so what changed then in his loan? I mean, this is a loan, this is a relationship he's had for a long time.
Exactly. So that email he got from ABSA said that they were announcing improved changes to the accounts. The improvement is a fee of 1.5% a year on whatever money is sitting in that Flexi Reserve account. So the money that you've now paid into your own loan can cost you. So if you have a million rand in there, say, and your loan is at 10.5%, having that money in the loan account saves you roughly 105,000 rand a year in interest. The new fee, the improvement, takes 15,000 rand of that straight back. So on Hendrik's numbers relating to his farming business, it comes to, as you said, around 300,000 rand a year.
So this would have been a tax on your own money, keeping it in a place where you want to keep it to save you interest.
Yes, something like that.
Okay, so then why didn't he just take his money out, I suppose?
Yeah, so that option would have meant that he lost the interest saving, which was the whole point of putting his money in there. To opt out of Flexi Reserve altogether meant that every extra rand he pays vanishes into the capital and he can't get it back. So the real choice was pay the fee or lose access to your own working capital. And yeah, he'd already paid for this facility once. There was an upfront facilitation fee of between 1 and 1.5% on day one. And some of these loans can run for 15 years. So I took up the issue with ABSA.
And what did they say? I mean, they clearly made a change, and it's one of these things that's kind of pushed to you. You're not asked.
Yes.
Most people just kind of accept it. What did they say?
and framed as an improvement, mind you. So the first response said that clients remain free to make advance payments without any adverse impact, and that the fee is for the ongoing availability of the funds. So I wasn't entirely clear on that. So I went back and asked more questions and got more answers. And ultimately, the answer was yes, the fee applies to money already sitting in the reserve going back years, including any funds accumulated previously. And the new position is that if you settle early, you pay a percentage of what you owe. So 3% in year 1, 2% in year 2, 1.5% in year 3, and from year 4, you give 90 days notice and pay nothing. And if you want out immediately in year 4 or later without giving that notice, you pay 90 days interest instead. Compared to the old position, in Absa's words, previously clients could provide 90 days notice for early settlement at any point without early settlement fees being levied. So ultimately, though, Hendrik complained. His first answer from the bank he calls a cold legal answer. Our terms and conditions allow us to introduce fees. Then he came back to me. As I say, I went back to Absa. And then his phone started ringing, first his bank manager and then the head of commercial banking. And then, he got an apology for the way the change had been communicated. And last week, he sat down with the regional manager at his bank, regional manager for commercial lines, and the outcome was that his loan terms stay exactly as they are. No fee will be charged on any surplus he pays into his flexi reserve.
Sure. So the head of commercial banking, that moved quickly. So he won.
He did win, and I asked him one more question. He asked this question: is this now going to apply to everyone? And this is where the you don't ask, you don't get comes in, because he was told the reversal is not a blanket approach. In his words, it's for customers that did not complain, the new fee of 1.5% would become effective. So as always, Stephen, knowledge is power. Hendrik says big banks have all the power and we must use the little leverage that we have as individual customers. So don't ask, you don't get.
I mean, usually your takeaway from these things is read the fine print. But Wendy, this time, if you don't ask, if you don't push back?
Well, this time I would say when your bank or any company that you do business with emails you about improvements or enhancements to something that you've already signed up for, read right to the end, because there's usually something a little bit more expensive for you or something that they're taking away, like quite deep into the correspondence. And then question it, push back, do the asking, because if you ask, you may get.
Your consumer ninja, Wendy Knowler. One farmer's refusal to simply accept a change to the loan led to a big saving for him.
702.
The best of the Money Show from this week.
In Business Unusual, the sheer boringness, the boredom, the unmitigated tedium of courses that your company makes you go on. Michael Gullan is the CEO at G&G Advocacy, and he looked at why it's so difficult to do proper training in a company and how people maybe are getting it wrong. It was such an interesting conversation with Michael.
Stephen, that has to be one of the finest intros to a discussion on this topic that I've ever had the pleasure of listening to, because you summed up every pain point every professional and every large corporate feels at the thought of doing yet another mind-numbing, boring online course that's supposed to bring change. So I couldn't have said it better than you did.
Well, thank you. What do you think people are getting wrong? There's clearly, so what they want as the output is they want an engaged workforce that has learned something, that has been changed in some way, has a new capability. And I get that. And I applaud that someone is thinking like that. That's a good thing. But somewhere the input is going badly wrong.
Absolutely, Stephen. I agree. I echo your sentiment in applauding organizations, and there are so many of them that are endeavoring to do this well. But I think it starts with being, somewhat divorced from the real intention behind the learning. I don't think there's sufficient thought given to what it is that the course is supposed to achieve in terms of a measurable learning outcome. And I think when a learning is treated simply as a support function rather than a strategic engine, and courses are commissioned sort of reactively without context, without real depth, then we'll end up in the situation that we're in.
Is it partly the way we learn now? which is we stare at a screen with the same expression that we stare at a screen, whether we're looking at social media or whether we're actually working. And maybe it's the human touch. I mean, I can think of workshops I've attended. Some of them I didn't enjoy at the time, but they had a real change, they had a real impact on me in the way that I think over the longer term, because there was something from that human contact, learning with other people. I mean, it wasn't being a kid again in a classroom. It was something much more fundamental than that. Is it the human touch that we're missing?
Stephen, absolutely. I think we sit with a situation where there's a sort of illusion of continuous learning, where as corporates we measure the learning activity and completion metrics, but we don't account for real engagement that drives learning. And then aligned with that is this automation of development of learning content. And as a result, courses are developed that are AI generated, that kind of try and tick every box in terms of the information, but they neglect the human contact that still needs to remain in courses, because there's certain learning, like leadership growth, for example, requires friction and dialogue, not just looking at a screen. And the kinds of workshops you're talking about now have a combination of that. And I think we're seeing a move too far away from that. And so you land up with these sort of fragile, inefficient courses that they're technically capable, but they're strategically fragile.
So is part of it, it's quite hard to, so let me go back a little bit. What the company wants to do is it needs to be able to justify the cost of the course. So two things happen. One is humans are expensive, so it's cheaper to do it through, a computer system. The second is that there needs to be an assessment tool that they're then able to point to and say, see, 90% of people passed or whatever it was, and that's much easier to do that online with a multiple choice or something than any other system. It's much easier to do it like that, for example, than to say, the workshop facilitator says this person was very good. That's hard to do. So is that maybe the problem? It's the need for assessment that makes this difficult, the need for a qualification or whatever at the end.
Steve, I think it is, but also I think there's sort of an illusion associated with that. And I think that the kind of the key error or limitation is too often there's this jump into a course because we need a course to drive a particular business outcome, but not necessarily sufficient thought about exactly what the very clear business outcomes that need to happen and how the executive team will endorse it and how that success will be measured and how that's applied. And then taking that into thinking about how do we assess the learning? Because to your point, it's not just completing the course and getting the certificate. It's rather thinking about what's the degree of engagement, what's the assimilation of the knowledge and application of it. And then how do we measure that new capability in the business, demonstrated skills, changed behaviors. And I think there's sometimes not sufficient thought given to that component, which results in some of the limitations that you just mentioned just now.
All of these courses, and fair play to them, all of these courses will have a feedback session at the end, right? Most of us will leave it blank. We leave it blank probably for two or three reasons. One is we don't think anyone's ever going to read it, and if they do, they're just going to ignore it. Or the feedback will be used against us. The second reason is we just want to get this over with. Now, if that feedback could be done properly, measured properly, and then used properly and used honestly, I imagine that would make a big difference, because I'm sure what happens is, one of the frustrations of it, is that you will give the same feedback course after course and you'll see it's been ignored.
Absolutely. And I think the limitation is looking just at or assessing just learner feedback in the context of completed forms, or rather than developing advanced analytics to really dig down into understanding what aspects of the content is engaged with and the degree of engagement, and then understanding how that content is measured in terms of how it's applied in the workplace. And of course, the challenge with that is time and effort, isn't it? And the fear of failure and what that does to someone's job or career prospects. And so I think the big thing to do is to try and map how we turn learning experience into data and data into decisions, because that really helps us understand what our failures are and what our successes are, and how we then continue to evolve our learning content so that we drive real business success.
Michael Gullan there, the CEO of G&G Advocacy, looking at how companies are just getting learning wrong in 2026.
The best of the money show
On 702.
702.
Personal finance this week. Warren Ingram, the co-founder at Galileo Capital, looking at one of our favorite investment debates. Should you buy a rental property? Property to rent out. He looked at some of the hidden costs, some of the risks, some of the responsibilities that come from being a landlord. It's not just about changing the light bulb. It's about so many other things. Warren Ingram has some very interesting views.
I think it's maybe allowing, like any good investment decision, doesn't start with what you believe. It starts with what do the numbers tell me. So I would say that if you're having this kind of a conversation with yourself or with a partner and you're kind of discussing this, don't start on the basis that I know property is a great investment, or alternatively, I know it's a terrible investment. Start with, I'm doing a value, like I'm doing a number conversation. It's called investing. It must be about numbers. I do this so that I make more money than I had 5 or 10, 15 years ago. And I think a lot of the time this debate starts emotively. It starts with your parents, your grandparents, or somebody saying, don't pay off, the landlord's bond, and you should be the landlord. And, there's so much demand for property. Look how many buildings they're building around Sandton or whatever the deal is. All of that's nice, but it doesn't get to a number. So I would say one looks at numbers once and first and second and third and fourth, and then you start to think about all the other stuff afterwards. And I bet you most people that have got a good story did the numbers properly. Most people who've got the horror story, I'm not saying it's their own fault, but they probably didn't do the numbers like they should have.
Okay, so if, for example, you buy a flat for 1.2 million rand, you're paying a bond of over 20 years, your interest rate's 11%, your bond payment is sort of around 12.5%, you would have to find a good tenant and to go from there. And that's the starting point for this conversation.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the time people don't do that sum correctly. So you kind of go, well, I know lots of people looking for a property. I'm just going to buy it, and the tenant will pay my bond. No, that's not how it works. It's incredibly rare that the property market gives you the opportunity to take 100% bond. So you're borrowing the whole amount that you owe, and that you can find a tenant that will pay off that whole bond every single month from the first month. Why do I say that? Because otherwise, the tenant wouldn't be a tenant. They would just buy the property themselves.
Yeah.
So the truth is that you are going to buy a property in most instances where the bond is going to be bigger than the rent that you can earn. So in the very first month, and it might well be for 3, 4, 5 years, your rent is not going to be at the rent that you're earning is not going to be at the level of your bond repayment. We haven't even got to the costs of, okay, what about all the other stuff that I've got to pay to be an owner? It's not just your bond. There's a whole lot of things that you have to pay in addition. And I think it's that very first conversation that you've got to get right on day one. Okay, fine. This bond is only 1.2. It's a nice apartment. It's close to the city, whatever. It's easy to travel. It's not that expensive. It's 1.2. Fine. That's not the conversation. What's the rent that I can earn from a property like that is close, and all of those things?
You mentioned other costs. I mean, this is often the thing, right? Is that you'll look at the bond and you'll think, well, that's the big number. That's my target. Okay, that's what I've got to do. But suddenly, and I mean, this is the thing about property, all sorts of other things start to come literally out of the woodwork.
Yeah, like the analogy. So you've got, firstly, we've got your fellow shareholder in the property, which is the tax man. So you're going to have to pay your municipality. You're going to have to pay rates. You're going to have to pay. If it's an apartment, that means it's a body corporate. So that means you're going to have to pay levies on top of the rates. Then you're going to have to pay for the insurance of the stuff inside the apartment. Not saying if you're renting it out, you're not insuring the kettle and the fridge, but you're insuring the carpets and the walls and all those kinds of things as well. So you've got insurance as well. I would suggest as well that you're setting aside money every single month from the very first day for when the place needs to be repainted or the carpets need to be redone. And you hope that that's not with a nightmare tenant that does it after the first lease. You hope that's in 5 or 10 years' time. So all of those costs are in addition to the bond that you've got to pay.
We're talking to Warren Ingram in Personal Finance tonight. Your questions for him about rental property. Does it make sense to buy a rental property and then to try and let it out? What do you need to know What are the hidden costs? Are there any benefits? Does it work? How do the success stories actually work? Your questions for an 011 883 0702 021 446 0567 and your voice note questions as well on 072 702 1702. There are other things too. I mean, you have to often pay someone to manage the property, or you have to put in the hours yourself.
Yeah. So, I mean, I love this. You know, people say, no, I'm just going to get an agent and they'll take care of me.
Yeah.
They'll look after everything. Really. What they want is they want to get someone into that property as fast as possible, and then they want to earn their 5 or 10% a month thereafter. And if it goes wrong, what they've lost is their little bit of the rent.
Yeah.
That's all they've lost.
They don't care.
Maybe it's an opportunity for them to get someone else in again, you know, and so they go. So unfortunately, you've got to look at this and say, if you're going to pay an agent, it's not fire and forget. You just need to know that. So you're going to pay the agent, you're going to pay the rates, you're going to pay the levies, you're going to pay the insurance, all of those things. I think you're probably in for a good few thousand, probably closer to 4,000 on top of the bond repayment.
Sure.
And I did a quick search for, you know, in preparation for the show and looking just around this area, what would be a 1-bedroom apartment? Let's go at that 1.2 million. And I think you're going to be, you know, pretty happy to get rent of about 8,500 a month. So you're paying out 12,500 or 12,000, whatever the number is for your interest. You know, let's say you get a decent interest rate. So now you're paying 12,000 on the mortgage. You're paying another, let's say 4 on all the other costs that you have to pay, and you're getting an 8.5. You're going backwards pretty quickly. So in your first year, you might well be back, underwater by about, let's say, between 80 to 90,000 rand in year one, and that's if everything's gone well. That's if the tenant's paid on time, everything's worked out. So it is a real thing to be able to say, have you done that number before you buy?
Sure. I mean, it's amazing how many costs they are, but you sort of forget that this is a property, and properties come with costs, and it takes you straight into the should you rent or should you buy debate as well.
Yeah, so maybe, I mean, I don't want to paint the picture that buy to let is always a bad idea. I don't think that's true. I think making a buying decision to any investment is, what price can I pay? Can I get a really good low price? So, for example, if new apartments are being built at 1.2 million, and you're in a close to Sandton, can you find an old apartment? Maybe you spend 100,000, and you're paying maybe 900,000, and suddenly the 8,500 rent that you're getting versus a 900,000 rand property, is that a better deal? Can you start to make the numbers work? Or is there some special situation where you find, you know, someone that's happy to pay a much higher rent for stability or certainty or something? So there will be times when your starting price or the starting rent make it a very attractive proposition. And I think that's the thing that people don't, the sum that they don't do. So yes, understand your running costs are probably, as I say, 3,000 or 4,000 per month, more than what your bond's going to be as well. It's your bonds on top of that. But now, how can I make these numbers work? And if you can't make the numbers work, then ignore what everyone's telling you, all the armchair experts, and just go, this is a lousy investment for me for now. I'm going to park it and do something else.
Okay, there are also big risks. And the first big risk, and this happens so often, is that your flat is got no one in it for a while. So you've got the bond and you've got no money coming in.
Yeah, and you know, either that you just don't get a tenant, or the real nightmare, you get a tenant that comes in for 3 months and then stops paying.
Yeah.
Now, in South Africa, I think it takes an average of 6 months to follow the process to get a tenant out who has stopped paying. You've got to follow. There's a very strict process that's, you know, written down in our law, and you've got to follow that process. You can't just, you know, lock them out and say, well, you know, get some like bouncer to come and bounce the tenant out. You've got to follow process.
And there's lights and water in the meantime.
Lights and water. You've got to pay the bond. You got to pay your rates, all of those things, and now you've got to pay some lawyer to go through the process of all the things you've got to do. So that's the nightmare scenario. But back to the tenant deal. You know, if you're in a 1-bedroom apartment, it doesn't mean that person's going to stay there for the next 10 years. They're probably going to move every 2 or 3 years themselves, and you'll be getting a turnover. So you might well be losing 1 month of rent every year, and just to work it out, that's 8%. So 8% of your income every year, if you've got turnover of property, is just being lost to an empty place. It's almost impossible to say, okay, you're out on the 31st and then you're in on the 1st.
Yeah.
The likelihood is it's empty for a month if you're lucky. And if you're very unlucky, 3, 4, 5, 6 months.
Sure. There's also concentration risk, which is about the amount of your capital, the amount of your money you're putting in one place.
Yeah, so this is the eggs in the baskets conversation. So the way I would say this is we take 1.2 million rand. We borrow, actually, we don't even take our own money. We borrow 1.2 million rand from a bank. Remember, these are not your friends, it's a bank. And I say to you, why don't we go and buy one share that only has one customer and only works in one market in one city? This is a great investment.
Yeah.
The best thing that you could possibly do. But when you do that for property, somehow people are okay with that. So the concentration risk is simply, now you're taking all the eggs you have and you're borrowing money and then you're putting them in this basket and then you hope that this basket's going to be okay. We've all lived in Joburg in a time when the property prices go down, and so that story doesn't always work out. It does work out if you're extremely lucky and you've got a place on the south coast of Natal or in the Western Cape or Hoedspruit or something, but it doesn't always work out.
Okay. We need to consider SARS. I mean, we always need to consider SARS. Death and taxes are certainties. Where does SARS come into the picture? Because this is income, and also there might be capital gains tax too.
Yeah, people, especially first-time landlords, this is the thing that catches a lot of people. So they start this and they think it's fine. It's my property. This isn't a salary. It's not. There's no PAYE. I'm fine. I don't have to pay tax on this. Unfortunately, rent is definitely taxable. It's exactly the same as if you were earning interest. It's part of the taxable income. It's going to attract income tax. So yes, you do have to pay, and you have to pay it from the very first year that you're in this deal. So don't forget that. What is nice is legitimate expenses. You can't now go and write off a whole lot of things like your new wardrobe because you had to make yourself look nice for potential tenants. Real expenses, real maintenance, those things you can write off against the tax. The tax you have to pay, and also then the interest that you're paying on the home loan. That's an expense you can write off. So there is a benefit to using SARS to help you in this deal. But remember now, it's not your property. It's a property that you're renting out. And when you sell that property one day, you're going to have to pay capital gains tax on the whole value of the entire profit. Why am I emphasizing that? When you sell your own private home, the thing you live in, you get quite a nice big gain before you have to start paying tax. It's about 3 million rands worth of profit before you actually start to pay capital gains tax. On your rental property, capital gains tax from the first cent.
Okay. Just to sort of also manage the fact that you are paying money, so you're paying a bond. If your bond and the rent come to the same, if you're just covering your costs effectively with the rent, won't all of that be deducted from the tax anyway? Would there be no tax?
No, because when you pay your mortgage, your home loan, unfortunately, it's not all, well, maybe fortunately, unfortunately, but that whole value is not just interest. So a portion of it is actually capital that you're repaying.
Right.
And so there's no benefits to that. It's only the interest portion of the repayment.
Okay. It's 12 minutes now to 8 o'clock. We have a question from Gail. Gail, hi. She says, I'm 47 years old. I have a retirement annuity I bought 12 years ago. I've been paying money into the RA every month. It's not doing well. It seems the growth has been poor. The fees are high. When I raised this with the advisor who sold me the policy, he said I must not cash it out and I would be penalized if I stopped contributing more money. He said it will come right if I just keep paying the last 8 years until I am 55. Should I keep going or should I cancel this policy? Yeah, that's a very interesting question, actually. What should Gail do, Warren? I mean, this happens often.
I can't say rude words on the show. So I'm trying
yes,
to.
You can.
So let's say this, Gail. Number one, I'm really sorry. Number two, what you can do is you can ask for a quote, which is called a paid up value quote. So what it'll do is, let's say your RA is worth R1 million. That's what they tell you the fund value is. If you ask them for a paid up value, what that will mean is, if I stop adding any money to this, what's the value then? And it might be a bit lower, but it gives you an idea of what the penalty will be. So that would be the first thing to do. The second thing is a Section 14 quote, which is you transfer this RA from this company to an investment platform where the fees should be much better, because I suspect this is about fees. And find out what that value is. So you might find that your RA is worth R1 million, but they're going to penalize you 100,000, which sounds like a huge amount of money, and I know it is, but it's 10%. And I feel that if you've got 8 years to age 55, and then you might carry on working to 65, what you want to do is go to a place where your fees are not 3.5% or 4% a year. They might be 1 or 2% a year. So that 10% that you might be paying as a penalty now, which I know is galling, actually you could make it up over a couple of years and then get many more years of good capital growth. So I would ask for those quotes to find out what the penalty will be and then make the decision. I feel don't be fooled by that you've only got 8 years.
Yeah.
You've got 8 years plus. So don't get stuck by that argument.
Very quickly, shouldn't an RA always do relatively well? Why do some of them do so badly?
I mean, to give credit, sometimes it's just the market conditions are not favorable. But a lot of the time, when it's these kinds of structures where there's big upfront fees, then there's big annual fees, and it's hard to figure out what you're actually paying, it's because you're paying an enormous amount of fees.
Yeah.
So even though the actual investment's doing well, it's being dragged down and kind of ground to a halt by very high fees. That's making this advisor obviously very rich.
Sure. Okay, one or two voice note questions. Let's take the first one on 072 702 1702.
Hi, Warren and Steve. Great show. This is Kathy from Sandton, and I have a question. We have a house, and we're considering selling it. We haven't built a lot of equity on it, but we think we can get not a substantial amount, but enough to put on a deposit for our next home. But our debate is, should we lease it out or wait until it gets a little bit more equity? Because in our area, we can lease for like. So the example you gave, 12,000 for 12,000, we can get that, but we would have to then pay the shortfall of the levies. So we're not sure if it's worth the hassle, or should we just sell the house, get a little bit of equity, and move to the next house with a little bit of that as a deposit? Because right now we're debating, if we don't get the exact price we're looking for, it might not be worth selling.
Yeah, Warren, I mean, this is how people end up with two properties, isn't it? Because they move on to the next one.
It's such like an intuitive thing. Well, I know the property well, I'm sure I can rent it out and everything will be fine. But back to the point we raised a bit earlier, what happens if your tenant is a nightmare tenant and now you've bought a new place and so now you've got to fund new bond and you've now got a problem tenant in the one that you were banking on where to pay off some of that bond. So my view is, if you treat this as a proper business and it's not a fire and forget scenario, maybe it makes sense. But in most instances, if you don't want to become a professional property investor where you're managing buildings and you're managing tenants and you can make some profit out of the thing, sell the thing, and then put all of that into the house that you're going to live in, and then you keep that bond as low as possible. And the whole trick here is still to try and be debt-free and build capital so that it compounds for you, not to then say, well, I've still got now two sets of debt, or one and 10%. I think you want to be debt-free. That's really the power here.
Okay, so that does make sense, actually. And we've got another voice note for you as well this evening.
Hi, Stephen. This is Fred from Clayville. I just want to find out from Warren, right? I've got a property which is about 1.1 million, right? I'm almost done. There is about 6,000 rands left for me to pay it off, right? So now I want to find out from Warren Ingram, is it advisable, boss, in 2 months' time I'll be turning 16. Is it advisable for me to pay off that house and then get another property? I understand you guys are talking about buying property to lend, to rent out or to lease, whatever the word is. So what's Warren Ingram's advice on that? Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you. Yeah, Warren?
Warren Ingram doesn't love property.
He doesn't.
So, and it's not because I'm biased. I just think you're 60 years old. You want to be building up your capital as fast as you can to when you're going to stop working, to when you hit retirement age, so you've got to be very sure of the tenants that you've got if you want to make it a property business. Otherwise, invest the money and spread your risks far and wide. Remember, it's a 1.1 million rand. Back to my one share example, it's 1.1 million in one property, in one city, in one country. I don't know. I'm not the biggest fan of doing that.
No, sure. Warren Ingram there, the co-founder of Galileo Capital, looking at whether rental property really works as an investment.
702.
You're listening to The Money Show's best bits.
You've been listening to the best bits of The Money Show, a digest of some of the best interviews from the show this week. If you'd like to hear more, please go to our website or your podcast app and search for The Money Show. Thanks for listening. As always, a good idea to share some of our content with other people that might have a bearing on their lives. We'll be back on The Money Show, 6 o'clock on Monday. Have a good weekend.